year I've been here now, it has felt like we've had a huge amount of activity, and I suppose I sometimes worried with so much inputs that we would potentially never quite get to the shape of what things need to be, and therefore the kind of outputs from that, the outcomes and impact, just as people have been describing. But I think it really is shaping up well, and there's much more clarity about what we need to do, and there's more focus on the deliverables of that. And I guess people have already said, so what is the big so what? You know, all these inputs, so what are we seeing, what's different, what's not different, and not being frightened to hear that is just as important as highlighting the progress that we're making. So I think it, you know, as everybody said, we remain on a journey. I think I'm keen that over the next year where we can, we invest, as Fiona set out, appropriately in a focused way to increase the impact and the pace of change around some of the recurring themes that keep coming up. And just lastly, it does start first with ourselves for all of us. And certainly as an exec team, we've been having discussions in our development sessions just around what that means for us, and also how we cascade that and have those discussions regularly with our own teams, so that culture is firmly at the front of what we do, and the relational aspect is really prominent in the organisation. So I agree, lots of work, but we need to keep our foot to the pedal on this one.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Fiona, for leading us through this item. I can hardly add anything to what Pam has articulated there. I would just want to re-emphasise on page 27 of the papers, there's a reference there to that the culture programme, there must be a focus on culture for another 2 to 3 years. I would say at least 2 to 3 years in that case. And building on what Pam was just saying, on the same page, the sentence that leaps out there is improving culture and living the NHS Scotland values is, however, the responsibility of every member of staff across the organisation. It's not something that can be done by the culture programme. And I'm hoping that the culture survey, the staff survey that is about to be issued, will take the temperature of the organisation and give us a picture of how what we've done, all the activity that Pam's mentioned, how that is landing with our workforce, and how it is percolating through the organisation, because that's the litmus test, as somebody mentioned, I think it was Jerry earlier, what difference is this making? That's the key to all of what we're doing. We have the intent, and we've had the activity. We recognise it's a long-term endeavour, but we need, through the metrics and through the survey, etc., to measure the impact of all we're doing. So thank you, Fiona, and all involved. Emma, I should mention Emma, our independent leader on this programme as well, and thank her for her work along with Fiona as external culture advisor. We move on now to board risk assurance, and we recognise that we're at a transitional stage with board risk assurance. That it's a developing piece of work, and that's why we just wanted a light touch at this particular meeting. So over to Boyd, the other Boyd, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Boyd. Yeah, so this paper is an update for the board on progress with moving forward our risk agenda, and the agenda is to establish, refresh and establish risk systems within the organisation that are suitable and fitting for us this year and moving forward. So I'm just going to refer to the paper as I speak, so forgive me while I flip between screens. So the key thing is to say that risk management is a key element of our internal controls and corporate governance. To understand risk, we need to think of it both in clinical terms, but also right across the organization. What we will have done so far is to identify and renew the key risks that are at board level. We've also done some work at executive level and a bit below to promote the idea of risks being held at various levels in the organization. A mapping exercise has been conducted, and that has mapped out risk registers that sit throughout the organization, and also has identified how we would update and maintain these, we were looking at how they will escalate and relate to each other, but also looking particularly for risk to be held, mitigated and managed where there is the operational ability to do so, rather than simply to state risk and in some cases to escalate without clear ownership or action. So the direction of travel this year will be to work with our internal auditors on an improvement program that will carry us forward to what I believe will in the next 12 months give us a much more robust footing for the recognition of the registering of and management of risk throughout the organisation, clinical and non-clinical. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Boyle, for the update. Any questions on that? Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Boy, this is really pleasing. I'm pleased with the improvement. The whole attitude, everything has changed as far as I can see on the risk side. This is looking good. Couple of questions. One, I'm assuming, and I'm looking at the appendix now. One, I'm assuming that the resource requirements that will be filled in as we go. So the more we look at this, the more people are going to be filling in the resource requirements that are there. Is the assumption. But the one that does concern me a little, and it's right near the end on IT, where our current and our target are high. Can you explain why we're in that? Because the vast majority of them is the right way. They're either very high, and the target is medium. Why this one? And it's on page 11 of the paper. Why the target is high? What is there a specific reason for that, or is it a matter of that's the best we think we can do because it's things like cybersecurity, IT, that kind of stuff?
Boyle.
I'm just unmuting. Yeah, I see where you're at. Yes. So I think you've answered it in a way, is that some of the ongoing high risk is because there is a real concern about cybersecurity, and that indeed those that are watching the media at the moment will have noted that back home for me in Ireland, we've had a little bit of a cybersecurity issue just in the last few weeks. So it clearly is a risk that is increasing. And so that will probably be part of the reason why we've kept it at that colour and at that level. The risk sits with David Park. He may wish to comment, but as with any of the board level risks, each is carrying a whole lot of subsets, and an attempt has been made to summarise the overall position. But within that particular risk of 11, there are lots and lots of different risks, and you can see in the table that there are quite a few elements to it. And so some of it, therefore, is a sort of as always, it's a subjective judgment as well as an element of objective. Of course, like most of the risks, it's difficult for the board to do things about risks, but some risks are such that it's felt that they should be reflected in the board risk register, which is what you have as the appendix that you referred to. Like any risk register, it's always dynamic, it's iterative, and it will change from time to time as risks come and go, or as mitigations come and go. And so we have to always remember that it's dynamic, and if we're getting it right through the course of a year, the risk register will change maybe on a quarterly basis, in small ways and sometimes more significantly. And so I think that's what that reflects in that on page 11, as you've said and I've confirmed.
We have 3 contributors waiting, Sarah, David and Graham. Sarah first.
Thanks, Boyd. So taking into account things that other Boyd has just said about it, obviously it's a live document, it'll be ever changing, and recognise that we're on a bit of a process to improve, and that's all looking good. I do have a slight anxiety that we don't have a risk on that high level board wide document that captures sort of statutory compliance, and it's something that has come up in conversations in different forums before, but one that would capture, I mean, I'm obviously thinking about statutory mandatory training with my staff governance hat on, but there are other areas as well where we would need to just have sight on our compliance, and just wondering if that's going to get picked up in the next round of improvements, or if it's something that we should be adding at this stage.
So I might, with the other Boyd's permission, defer to Fiona to catch that one, but I suppose it catches hold of the key thing that we could probably have 100 risks on the all of them are really important, but it's getting what should sit on the board risk register that the board might be able to do something or influence them, as opposed to what needs to be really held in the places where those who might make the change and the difference should hold them. And so if I can step us away from the specific to the broad principle, the idea is that we really want responsibility, ownership and leadership to be at all levels. And if you like, this is a cultural reference now, as well as a systems reference, that we have leadership and responsibility and ownership for things throughout the organization, because it can't be a top-down authority. We must be a network and some sort of organism as well as organization that is able to hold risks. And for us at board level, we need to be aware of many things, but whether we hold the risk or whether a specific risk should be somewhere else, with us minded and aware of it, but we know that it's being carried somewhere. I'll let Fiona come in the specific now, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, and it's a really good point, because we have this almost puts the spotlight on that challenge we've got about making sure we've got the right approach to managing our risks and what sits where, and we certainly haven't, put aside. We've certainly still got an ongoing discussion about whether there is a general board level risk around, as you say, statutory and legal compliance, etc. I think the key for us here is that which we are working on, is making sure that each of the chief officers and the corporate services have this risk clearly articulated with an action plan that's being centrally monitored through our staff governance committee, through our health and safety committee, and also through our systems leadership and executive directors group. And it's how we get that visibility of actually what's happening on this risk, that we're consistent about how we're managing it, and that we're accurately assessing the level of risk at that operational level. And for me, that's the bit we've started work on, and we'll continue to report that up through staff governance and health and safety committee. But I think we will come back in our next iteration, I think, of the framework. Almost using that particular issue is one that helps us understand how we get that right categorisation between board level assurance and operational management.
Thanks. David, your hand was up. I don't see that now. Do you still want to come in?
I think Boyd has largely answered it. It was around the IT question. I mean, just to say that the national picture or the external picture really is what's driving the level of risk. And second, because the example that Boyd gave and cyber attack is unfortunately growing on a global basis with ransomware and various things going on. With our systems becoming more national systems as opposed to local systems, then again, there's a national team that has been set up around cybersecurity to which we are active members. And that's recognising that there's both national work that can be done, but also there's resilience work that we can do locally, so that if we are subject to a cyber attack, then we have enough resilience to keep operating. So that work will continue, and it's going to be an ongoing battle. But as long as the external pressures are as they are today, then it's likely to remain a high risk for us, because it's got the potential for being such a high impact. Thanks.
Indeed it has. Graham Bell.
Boyd, again, I think you may have, or you have partly answered my question, but I'm aware of how hard it is to stop these kinds of things just becoming a somewhat abstract, desk-based process. And you referred to trying to embed it, the understanding and the awareness throughout the organisation. It was really just a question about how you're doing that and how you keep it going, which is often as much of the challenge.
Yeah, I'm tempted to yeah. Since I'm on record in the board, I won't reference fairy dust or anything, but it's going to take hard work, I think, and perseverance. It's going to take communication and clarity. It's clarity about the system, about the structure of the risk system, as well as the function of it. And it's going to take time. So this is not going to be a quick fix. And in some ways, I must admit, when we realised we had the paper coming back to board for a review, while a lot has happened and a number of sessions and various other bits and pieces have been happening, it still feels like we haven't travelled that far in what we see as the journey. And in some ways, the reporting interval might need to be stretched a bit, because this will take time. And that's the key thing. But what we don't want to do, though, is let it take time and forget about it. What we want to do is to take time to get somewhere with it. And if there are 10,500 people plus working in the organisation, then we're going to really make risk part of the working agenda of many of the operational meetings, so that it is dynamic everywhere, then that's not an overnight change. And how are we going to do it? By the headlines that I've just given, but also by that perseverance and spreading it through the layers. That we've got a plan for how to do it initially, and we're working with the internal auditors. So there is an improvement plan, and that will report into the audit committee. And so we will have, if you like, some reporting below the board on the progress that we're making. And that will be something that happens in the course of the coming 12 months. Indeed, we're reporting towards the end of this year is when we have to report on that. So there's a system behind how we do this as well. I suspect it'll take us a couple of years to really get somewhere. And so this is an important piece of work that will go on for some time.
Yeah, I was struck with the earlier discussions around primary care, just how distributed the risk is, and indeed how people in maybe less noticeable parts of the organisation may in fact be the first to spot things. And how do you capture that? It's just such a challenge. But thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And we do have to think of NHS Highland not as one big thing. And if you take the example you've just given, there mainly are an awful lot of independent contractors who each of them carry their own risks as independent businesses. Yet nevertheless, the public will look at health-related risks as being all part of the NHS. So it's a really complex picture, and that complexity gets within the salaried or employed mainstream NHS, if you like. It's complex because any given risk may be held by several different sections or departments that do different pieces of work, yet they kind of hold the risk if you split the risk into subsets. And so, you know, the risk of not being able to do an operation is not just about surgeons or equipment or nurses. It could be about oxygen supply. It could be about building ventilation. It could be about fire hazards. You know, it could be about COVID. So, and it could be that the risk is in if all of these, and in different months, you know, the risk might be real and present for one of those, and the rest are okay because you've got mitigations in place and safeguards. So it's a highly complex area, yet that is what the NHS particularly has to do as a clinical and caregiving organisation.
Okay, thank you. Alistair.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Boyd Peters made some really important points. This is a complicated, ever-changing, dynamic situation, and to embed it across the workforce and the organisation is a mammoth task. And then on top of that, there'll be the refresher training, because once it's embedded, you're going to have to continue to refresh and make sure people are up to date when a risk changes and when everything moves on. So I think I agree with Boyd. I think it's got to be done over a period of time. I think it's got to be planned carefully, and there's going to be different ways of actually delivering it. You know, obviously with the induction of staff, there's a real chance there to build it into that. There's a real chance to build it into appraisals and other things that are done, but it is really hard to accelerate this. And the key thing to me is it's all very well embedding it, and this might be a difficult question for Boyd, but how do you actually know if somebody actually understands the risks and their role or their department's role in mitigating the risks? Because it is very difficult for people, especially when it's out with their direct area. You know, Boyd gave a good example there, and I was speaking to a colleague from on the board of Grampian, and one of their risks, Boyd mentions operations, was actually one of their risks was actually the recent strike of the inspectors on trains that stopped people getting into the stations on the days that they wanted to do the operation. So it is very difficult to cover everything. But I suppose the question to Boyd is, how do we actually make sure that people understand the risk register and their part in it when we've managed to embed it? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And the good news, I suppose, is that we are not operating in a vacuum, and the NHS really already does risk in many, many ways. And there are lots of risk activities. There is a lot of risk awareness, and there are processes already for managing risk, for escalating risk into systems, so that there's an awareness at a higher level, as well as the local management of it. So we're not coming at this as an unploughed field, but rather what we're going to do is to join up what already exists, organize it and systemize it, so that it will, as a result, be will ensure that things are as uniform as possible in approach, and that people understand that and it's not an unconscious activity, but it becomes a conscious and deliberate activity at certain times in any part of the operational units. And that's the plan, really. So the good news is that we kind of have it already, and we are simply tidying up and organizing it into a system that joins up right across, as I hope the paper the last time also described, and that's the intention.
Okay, thanks, Boyd. And just I think we all realise that the risk is inherent in health and care services, and it's unavoidable indeed. And this is going to be something that requires considerable consideration at all levels of the organisation before we feel we in a more secure position regarding the way we handle this framework. Okay, thank you. And we have one more item before we break for lunch, which is the COVID update from Tim.
Thank you, Boyd. I'll try not to keep people from their lunch too much. I'm pleased to say the levels of COVID are pretty low across the whole of NHS Highland at the moment. We're getting something in the region of perhaps around 20 or so cases a week. So COVID hasn't gone away, and I think it's very important to recognise that, but it's still in low levels, as is reflected by the population control levels of level 2 over most of NHS Highland and level 1 over most of the islands not connected to the mainland. We have seen in other parts of Scotland and other parts of the UK the rise in some variants of COVID, and that's certainly something to be concerned about. We haven't had any variant clusters confirmed yet within NHS Highland, and may well come at some point in the near future. It takes a couple of weeks to sort out and to confirm that there is a variant, and we get a little bit of advanced warning, but we can't be definite about that. So we're seeing a rise in what could be variants, but we're certainly nowhere near what other places are experiencing. But there is a little bit of a risk, as Rebecca Helliwell noted earlier, in parts of Argyll and Bute being very close to Glasgow. There are also risks that we saw come to a reality after Christmas in the Inverness area, and the connections that Inverness has giving rise to variant spreading. So there are those risks that are still around, but at the moment I think we are in we're in a reasonably good position. Testing is continuing to go well. John Wallace mentioned earlier on in the meeting about how testing at the start of COVID was very difficult, particularly in rural areas, but things have improved very considerably, both in terms of PCR testing, and we now have a very good and comprehensive lateral flow testing system across the whole area. We retain our capacity for contact tracing, and we're able to do enhanced contact tracing, which is important in managing the variants. And we've also been able to offer mutual aid to other health boards in their contact tracing, with our contact tracers working to support places like Glasgow. We've seen other parts of Scotland have relatively high levels, notably Murray, but that didn't spread into Highland. It wasn't connected with variants, and I'm pleased to say that has very much reduced. Coming on to vaccination, we're continuing with a successful vaccination programme. Now about 2/3 of it is being done in primary care, and 1/3 of it in board led clinics. We've got to 73% of the eligible population has had its first dose of vaccine, and 48% having a second dose. At the moment, we're concentrating on the group of people aged between 40 and 49, and hope to get considerable majority of those with their first vaccine by the end by the end of this week, and then moving on to the younger groups. We are somewhat dependent on stock, so progress isn't just down to us, but we're anticipating a good arrival of stock quite soon. So I suppose the overall message is that things are going pretty well, but we do need to be circumspect around what may happen, and just recognise that there is still some COVID in the community. It's not going away, but control measures seem to be working pretty well.
Thank you, Tim. And the overriding message must be that not to drop our guard and to remain vigilant to avoid any spike in the numbers, as we've seen in some other board areas in recent times, and to adhere to the rules on physical distancing, such like. Any comments, questions? I don't see any.
Alex has his hand up.
Right, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Yeah, Tim, obviously staycation's an issue, and you touched on that in terms of what's coming. The bit that I'm a little bit concerned about, they're starting to open up the cruise industry, and specifically the cruise in the UK. So the cruises this year, as far as I understand it, will be UK-based ships leaving UK ports, going to UK ports. The problem with that is most of those will start in the south of England, and the first port of call is an NHS Highland port. And as they move round, they're always going to an NHS Highland port, apart from the ones that go up to Shetland and Orkney, and then come down again. Have we got things set up to do increased testing and contact tracing around those specific ports, or is it a matter of just waiting and seeing to see what actually comes? Thanks.
Yeah, there's been work done with Scottish Government around cruise ships. The initial cruises, a lot of them aren't docking, and they're just cruising around Scotland and around other parts of the UK. Also, many cruises insist on proof of vaccination for passengers. So I think the risk is mitigated to some extent. Where cruises do dock, there will be a risk, but then the passengers will and tourists will mainly be visiting places en masse, and there is scope for introducing enhanced testing in any areas. What we haven't got is a system where we will be insisting on passengers getting tested before they disembark at, whether it's Invergordon or Oban or wherever. I don't think that's justified, but we do have other measures that that can be put in place. So I think it is a risk, but it should be a manageable risk. And while the ships are coming from England by and large, the places they're coming from and the passengers on the ships are probably at a bit of a lower risk of COVID than many other parts of England or other parts of Europe.
Thank you, Tim. Graham Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Tim. Just a localised issue. I've had phone calls from constituents living in Cardross who are registered with a Dumbarton GP, and because they're registered in Dumbarton, West Dumbartonshire, they've had trouble accessing the vaccinations, and they've been told to join a surgery in Helensburgh. So I don't know, is there an issue there, or thanks?
Thank you. I'm not. There was certainly an issue which was addressed, and the individuals were identified and received vaccinations. So that was quite a few weeks ago with the older residents there. I'm not aware, and I would be surprised if that issue is still continuing. But if it is, it's clearly something that we need to that we need to pick up. So be quite happy if you could let me know
Okay.
outside the meeting if that's still going on.
Okay, Tim. Thank you.
Margaret, is that a legacy hand?
It is indeed. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Alex, did you want to come back in? No. Okay. Right, I think we can now break for lunch, and could we aim to be back at 1:30? It's just over 20 minutes before we go into social mitigation with Tim after lunch. Thank you.